folks, it's Shannon. Welcome on in. We're going to be talking today about a topic that people have asked questions about a couple times, and that is hedge riding. What is hedge riding? Um, it's something I've mentioned in some of my videos during the 12 Days of Yule, and I wanted to get into some of the details about it. So grab some tea or whatever hot beverage you prefer, or cold beverage, I suppose. And let's get into it. So, before we get into the exact details of what hedge riding is, or at least my best attempt to explain it, I want to say that this is all my personal experience and may not work for you in the same way. So, that said, I don't want you to be discouraged because I was quite discouraged when I first heard about hedge riding. Um, as somebody that has mental health issues and that is neurospicy, um, a lot of people said that there was no safe way for me to do it, and I have found that that's not been true at all. So, I want to talk about some of the challenges, but also want to encourage people to adapt it in any way that makes sense for you so that you can do this really cool practice. That said, with hedge riding, we are going to be working with altered states of consciousness. And so I think it's really important that this is not a practice for beginners. You have to be fairly advanced with meditation and with being able to focus, but not in a way. It's kind of hard to explain. You're not focusing like meditation where you're doing breath meditation. You're not going to be just trying to pay attention to nothing. It's more you want to be able to redirect your mind when you get distracted by noises around you or things like that. Um, So, yeah, I think that you are going to have to know how to do some of that. And maybe in a future video, we can get into how I worked on learning that. But if you already are able to meditate for, probably 5-10 minutes, I think is good enough to start practicing. Um, then you should be able to start working on hedge writing. So, back to the caveats with altered states of consciousness, it is very important to be careful. There are some people that um, might not be best served by altered states of consciousness, and especially certain ways of reaching them. I am in no means suggesting using flying ointments or um, various other medications or things like that to reach metal, an altered state of consciousness. I think there are much safer ways to do it, including like drumming, um, chanting, dancing, things like that that are repetitive in nature. So please, please, please don't mistake me, and know that this entire video is just for educational and entertainment purposes. So far we've talked about the fact that this is just my experience. It may look different for different people based on your brain and how it works best. Um, the fact that we will be using altered states of consciousness to do hedge writing, and some of the kind of caveats about um, this video and my discussion of hedge writing. Um, I also wanted to say that um, if you're somebody that doesn't visualize and you think that that means that you can't do hedge writing, I would beg to differ because I'm somebody that it has hypophantasia, which means that when I close my eyes, I see mostly black and some kind of colors and shapes sometimes. But I can do I can hedge ride without being able to visualize, and so I just want to let you know that that doesn't have to be something that stops you if it's something that you struggle with. So I think that's enough disclaimers for now. Let's get into the actual tea about hedge riding. So the way that I define hedge riding is that it's journeying to the other world to interact with different spirits, beings, and energies. Um, and I think we're going to have to break down several parts of that definition. Um, when I'm talking about journeying, I'm talking about kind of not quite like what you do during guided meditations, but that's kind of the closest thing that I can talk about for most people. So when I hedge ride, I'm laying down in my bedroom and I have my trusty headphones on, and I'll usually have a drumming track playing that will have a signal at the beginning and a signal at the end. So between those two signals, I'm allowing my mind to kind of wander in the other world and see who I run into, what energies I interact with, um, and things like that. So some people call hedge riding spirit flight or journeying. Um, I believe astral travel is fairly similar, so I think that is a similar term. Um, I don't know about path working. Some people describe like um, imagining that they've gone into like a tarot card, for example, and kind of walking through the tarot card. I think that probably is on the spectrum of hedge riding as well. And I really do think it is a spectrum from kind of like breath meditation all the way on up to hedge riding, and possibly further. And I just haven't explored further yet. And I would say that I'm careful about using the word shaman or shamanic. Um, I think the Norse Witch did a great video on this, which I'll link below. But it's a problematic term, and I think that it makes sense to get away from using it, honestly. So, that said, I think people use that term pretty frequently to talk about hedge riding and things like that. So, again, for me, when I go on a hedge riding trip, it's a conscious decision to try to usually answer some kind of question or embody some kind of intention. And I think that it's really important to have that in your mind before you go into the journey so that you can have kind of like a guiding light as you're going on the journey. Now, often I end up in realms and talking to people that have nothing to do with my original intention or my original question. And that's just part of the process, is going with it. But I think it is important to set that intention at the beginning. So that's usually the first step for me, is figuring out, okay, why do I want to go on a hedge ride? What do I want to get out of it? So once I have my intention, I'll usually get my kind of area set up. Like I said, I usually hedge ride on my bed, just because it's a safe place for me to do so. And I can make that a private area. You may have met my cat Dragon in some other videos. He tends to like to come and like lay on me when I hedge ride, and I actually try to keep him from doing that. I close off the windows and the doors to my bedroom because I find it a little bit harder to leave my body if I have that physical connection with my cat. Um, that said, there have been some interesting stories which we can get into some other day. But anyway, so I close off my bedroom. I usually make sure that everything's clean and there's not a lot of clutter around because I feel like that would really get in the way of focusing. Um, and then I lie down on my bed, and I have tools that I have made to be useful for hedge riding. So I have three main tools that I use most of the time. One is my hag bag, which we can talk about what goes into it, but it's basically a collection of herbs and crystals and some ties to the way that I get into the other world that are useful for me. So I have my hag bag, which stays on my right as I'm laying down. I have my wand, which I keep kind of right on my chest as I'm laying down. And then I have a black tourmaline crystal that I use for grounding when I get back from the hedge ride, and that's on my left. And that's kind of how I set up the space. I put my noise canceling headphones on, and then I have an eye pillow that I use to keep my eyes closed while I'm journeying. So once I'm all settled, and I have, dark and quiet, um, I will usually work on getting relaxed. So this you can do in a bunch of different ways. For me, usually I just take some deep breaths and kind of allow my muscles to relax. Um, I'll usually do this around the same time that I start the drumming track that I'm listening to. And so that all kind of together fairly quickly gets me into an altered state of consciousness. But when I was first practicing, Um, it took more time. So don't be discouraged if it takes minutes, even if it takes the whole time that you're listening to the drumming track to relax and get into a deep state of altered consciousness that allows you to go into a deep state of meditation. Just keep practicing, it'll come. At that point, I have a fairly typical way that I enter the other world. And I can tell you the details of mine, but everybody finds a different way, whether that's through a door, whether that's through a place that meant a lot to you as a child, whether that's through the roots of a tree. I've heard a lot of different ways that people can get there. Um, and so usually you're going to want to remember the exact steps of how you got there so that you can retrace them at the end of the journey. Um, that's pretty important because you don't want to leave yourself kind of in that disconnected state. And so then once you enter the other world, it depends on which part of the other world you went to and kind of your own cosmology and what you believe is true about the universe. For me, I use the fact that there's the world tree, and then there's an upper world, a middle world, and a lower world. And underneath the lower world is the underworld. So for me, I'm usually journeying in the lower world. Um, Sometimes I go to the upper world. I don't know that I've ever actually gone to the middle world, which is the most like close to our world. Um, I have more than enough of the real world in my life. Thank you. So yeah, the lower world is a great place to start. And one of the first things that I did when I started hedge riding was to set up an astral garden there that serves as kind of the place that I land every time I come to the other world. Um, Not every time, most times. Um, so yeah, I think that is a really good first step is to try to just get to the other world and find a place that's safe that you can make your astral garden. Um, the other thing that you're going to want to do on one of your early trips is to ask for a spirit guide. Um, for me, the animal rabbit showed up for me the first time that I went to the other world. Um, so I would suggest those two things: find a spirit guide, make an astral garden. Um, and then on your first ride, that's probably way more than you'll be able to do, honestly. You'll probably stumble into the other world and be like, what the heck was that? Um, just remember how you got there and go backwards to get back to your body. So, like we talked about before, once you're done with your journey, and usually on drumming tracks, there'll be a signal that sounds different, and that'll be your clue that you've got like a couple minutes to get back to your body. And so at that point, I usually retrace my steps that I use to get into the other world and will walk back to my physical body. Um, and then, much like meditations that are guided by other people, you often start with like small movements of your fingers, circling your wrists, kind of wiggling around. And then, when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Now, grounding after hedge riding is really important. And so, this is the first step that I take when I get back. There's a couple different things. I will cleanse my body if I'm worried about any spirits or energies that I interacted with. So, whatever means you want to use to do that, I will call back all of my power and energy to my body, and I will ground, usually by holding my black tourmaline crystal. But often eating will be very helpful for me too. But again, everybody has different ways of cleansing their energy and grounding. And that's another reason that hedge riding is not for beginners. You got to know how to do these steps so that you can get back into a state of equilibrium and not end up floaty and disconnected all day, which can be really, really draining. And there'll be some trial and error and you'll make some errors, but so yeah, if you go on a journey and come back and feel like really out of it and fuzzy, I would say do more grounding exercises until you're feeling like your usual self. Okay, so that is kind of the process of going on a hedge ride. um, like I said, the contents will vary significantly based on your your mind, basically your belief in the cosmos, your interactions with different spirits and energies and beings, um, and just kind of what you need at that point. Um, it'll be different each time. Sometimes you will get into like ruts, I have found, but we can talk about all those details later. Um, the first couple of times are more likely to be like, did I get there? I don't know if I got there. I don't know, Um, and like I said, just keep practicing, just keep trying, and it'll come to you, and you'll know when you're there. You'll know once you get it to the other world. So, with all of that said, I wanted to give you some resources to learn more because I think it's really important to get multiple people's perspectives before you do something like hedge riding. Um, I did a lot of reading before I tried for the first time. Um, and I would recommend, in particular, the blog Flying the Hedge by Willow. She has a hedge riding series that I found very helpful in getting to the other world for my first time. And then there's also a book by Pagan Portals by Harmony Sal that's called Hedge Riding. Um, there's another one by the same author that's about like hedge witchery. But if you're specifically interested in hedge riding, I would recommend the book titled Hedge Riding. There are also lots of other people that talk about spirit flight on YouTube and in various other witchy blogs. I just found those to be the most step by step and helpful with um, establishing kind of my patterns about how I hedge ride. If you have other good resources for hedge riding or spirit flight or astral travel, please link them below. I'd be very curious. I have found a lot of resources that were not as good as I hoped they would be, and so would be very interested to learn more resources for sharing with people. So yeah, that is the basics of what I would say hedge riding is. And like I said, this is all my personal gnosis. I really, really encourage you to triangulate with other practitioners and learn um, the details that are specific to your ancestry and your culture, and to dive in if you're interested. Um, I would say first steps, if you are completely new to all of this, would be to work on meditating. Get something like Calm or Insight Timer or Headspace and get comfortable doing 5-10 minutes of meditation consistently before you start with any of this. So, with that said, I have lots of other details we can get into about hedge riding, but I'm curious what questions you have and what things you would be interested in hearing more about. Um, I think one thing that people have asked about already is kind of what protections I use, and I'm happy to get into that as something that we talk about on the channel. But if there are other things you're curious about, let me know down below. Um, all right, I hope that this video was really interesting, and if you want to see more from me, just click on the link on the screen and keep watching. Bye!